Hi. You're listening to the Corporate Cleanse podcast, where we talk about the pros and cons of corporate life and how I, a former fancy executive, hit full burnout and am now on a journey to explore how we all can maintain our sanity and sense of self, all while climbing the corporate ladder. I hope you enjoy listening along with me and know that everyone needs, occasionally, a corporate cleanse. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to tackle imposter syndrome. I'm actually surprised that I haven't talked about this topic yet, because as far as topic requests go, this is like number 2. This is like maybe number 1.5. I get asked this so often, and it's sneaky. It doesn't always come out as like, hey, I'm feeling imposter syndrome. Like, what are your tips? It comes out like, hey, I'm wondering how to negotiate a raise when I don't have a lot of years of experience. I'm managing my first team. What do I do? I want to switch jobs, but I don't know what I'm doing. Hey, I know nothing about financial independence. What are your favorite resources? Like, that's kind of how these typically come out. So even though someone's asking for another thing, imposter syndrome is the piece that's feeding the way that they're talking about that topic, if that makes sense. Like when someone brings it up to me, I hear the imposter syndrome come through. And when you think about imposter syndrome, it is this fear of being found out. Like that is the definition of being like found out. And it affects almost all of us. It's way more pervasive than we think, and it's super sneaky. Harvard Business Review did a study and said that even executives, their number one fear was being, quote, found out. Was being found out to be incompetent, to be found out that they're a fraud or that they don't know what they're doing. Imposter syndrome is defined as intellectual self-doubt. So you enter a room, a situation, a scenario, and you feel like you don't belong, that you don't have the qualifications to be there, that you don't know what you're doing, that you are dumb. Like, this is how I feel when I go into a Delta lounge. I still feel this way. I'm still like, someone's going to just know that I don't belong here, and they're going to just like kick me out. They're going to be like, this person 100% doesn't belong. But that's how I feel walking in. And what is so interesting is in all of these articles I read and all of the podcast episodes I listened to about this, it was specifically the fear of being found out by other people. It's 100% a managing your perception thing. It's not a you thing. It's a you in the world thing. So if you have, or if you are struggling with imposter syndrome, first, honestly, congratulations. Congratulations on this superhero level of self-awareness. Like, if you have imposter syndrome, you have an outsized amount of self-awareness because you are trying to manage your perception in the world, you in the world. That is the basis of imposter syndrome, is you're likely not a severe narcissist and are constantly aware of you in the world, how you are moving throughout the world, how you are showing up. So the silver lining, the basis, the foundation of imposter syndrome is strong self-awareness. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. Like, my favorite people in the world, the people that I've managed, the people I've worked with, are very self-aware individuals. They understand how they show up. They understand their flaws, their strengths, their lessons learned. They understand and view that and perceive themselves a lot more often than narcissists do for sure. My husband and I joke that if we were to have a baby, that they would be the most anxious kid alive. Like, they would have the most crippling self-awareness. I mean, they would definitely be blind for sure, like severe nearsightedness. and they'd have a really good jawline, but they would be really, really, really anxious and self-aware and probably be crippled with imposter syndrome. So let's see, my life, self-awareness and imposter syndrome have been such a big part of my life and how I've kind of perceived and navigated the world. Overwhelming self-awareness and imposter syndrome have like scarcely left my side. I can scarcely recall times that I didn't feel this heavy weight. Growing up in my teen years, in my early adulthood, in my career, in my relationships, standing in line at the grocery store, like, am I standing in the right place? Have I cut in front of somebody that they're just like seething and not telling me? Will people think I'm rude, or I don't know, if am I on my phone and I missed somebody standing in front of me, they're gonna be like, oh, stupid person on your phone all the time. Like, these are the thoughts that run through my mind when I go to Smith's. Am I following like proper grocery store etiquette that, you know, everyone got lessons on and I just like, I don't know, missed that day? These are the things, this is sort of my baseline. Showing up for plans early. We've all been there. That's a vulnerable place to be. You're just sitting there. You're just sitting there, like showing up to anything early and nobody else is there. Like even a Zoom meeting and you're the first one there and you're just staring at yourself and you're like, wow, I'm just here with my thoughts, and like what's running through your mind? For me, it's, am I awkward when other people aren't awkward? Like, am I a loser because I have no plans or no friends and like I'm like, I don't know, scrolling through Venmo just to look like I'm doing something with my time? Do people think I'm desperate? It's a vulnerable place to be, is just to sit there alone because you showed up early, because you were punctual. So I grew up in fairly rural Spanish Fork, Utah. I think all the time, do I have sort of the necessary decorum to be out in the world? Like that just sort of goes through my mind because of how I was raised. Will this waiter at the restaurant think I'm just, I don't know, trash and just like toss me out? And being someone who didn't come from money, I have to ask questions like, what is escrow? When I bought my first house, I was like, surely they will find me out and say, never mind, you can't buy this house. And so when they were talking me through escrow, I was like, yes, totally. And I just nodded. And then I was just going to pretend. I was just going to pretend that I knew what escrow was and let the person move on and then sign this huge stack of papers and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then I thought, no, Jen, this is a big deal. You're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, most of it in interest. Like, you need to figure out what the hell escrow is and how it works. But again, these thoughts go through my mind because it's intellectual self-doubt. It's like, do I have enough information to be in this situation, or will people find out that I don't? And everyday life, I am constantly feeling weird and other. This is just like a weird thing for me. I constantly kind of go throughout this life feeling a little other. And this fear that people are going to find me out, that I'm just actually a very weird person who has no idea what I'm doing and still doesn't understand really how the internet works, really, and really don't understand how electricity works, like still. But I can somehow recall every single one of the original 151 Pokemon, you know? With number 151 being Mew. Anyway, I want to talk about imposter syndrome and this idea that we need to be ready to go and do the things that we want to do, to feel confident sitting at a high-level table at work. Like, we have this idea of feeling ready. It's a form of anxiety, which we've talked a lot about on this podcast. The constant fear of being found out as a fraud results in everyday anxiety. It most often results in higher levels of stress hormone cortisol. Oh my God. That's another thing I thought about today too, because someone told me recently that like high intensity workouts like spin produces cortisol. So rather than you like trying to be fit and lose weight, your body's actually holding on to weight because your body is producing cortisol. Imposter syndrome is also doing the same thing, and we don't like cortisol, okay? It like dysregulates your nervous system. We don't like it. But most often it's resulting in higher levels of stress hormone in our bodies and our brains, which impacts our work performance, productivity, and health. So imposter syndrome isn't just like it's pretty harmless. Like it actually influences a lot of ourselves, our body, how we perform, whether or not we hold on to weight, water weight. So that's what I want to talk about today. My very first caveat, okay, before I dive into this. Imposter syndrome isn't all just in your head. I totally get that. Like Harvard Business Review did an article about this, and it reads, the impact of systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, and other biases were categorically absent when the concept of imposter syndrome was developed. Many groups were excluded from the study, namely women of color and people of various income levels, genders, and professional backgrounds. Even as we know it today, imposter syndrome puts the blame on individuals without accounting for the historical and cultural contexts that are foundational to how it manifests in both women of color and white women. Imposter syndrome directs our view toward fixing women at work instead of fixing the places where women work. So like, I'm not going to talk about those pieces that we can't really control. Like the things that perpetuate imposter syndrome on a macro level, like systemic racism, and sexism, those are hard things. So I want to make sure that that's like really known, that it isn't all just in your head. Like you could come from a different background, and there is classism, and there is sexism, and there is racism. But I can't fix all that on this podcast. God willing, I try, but I can't. That's that. So I'm talking today specifically about the feelings of unworthiness that we give ourselves, that we conjure up, that our mind tells us, and how to combat that. I've thought a lot about this concept of ready. So the first thing that has been on my mind as I've thought about this topic is the myth of ready, the myth of readiness. This idea that we have to be ready to do the things. Oh, I'll do that when I'm ready. I have to learn some things before I do that. Oh, I can't take that project because I'm not ready. I have to get some training before I can be a manager for the first time. We look at life kind of like this video game where you have to, you have your level, you have your bag of supplies, you have to have like your level 48 helm or your special sword before you can go fight this big boss. And I'm really looking back on my career, discussions I've had with colleagues and leaders, and I think readiness is a myth. Readiness and preparedness aren't real. And they're not definable. They're myths. I recall this webinar I attended. Okay, so there's a women in tech group here in Utah, and there was a board readiness webinar. And I was like, yeah, that's a mystery to me. And I'd love to learn how to get ready to serve on a board. For a lot of us, especially as women, we're like, holy hell, being paid to sit on a board, being paid to sit on a board to consult, offer tips, weigh in on this or that like 4 times a year. Well, that sounds dope. Like, how do I do that? It was this mystery for me. So I was like, yep, I'm going to attend that webinar. And it was such a mystery. So this webinar with several women who have sat on boards, and there was one man. And he's actually a pretty decent guy in the community. Like, he's trying. He started a company that sold to Adobe, and now he's the CEO of another successful company, and he's trying. So it was all these women that have sit on boards, and then this man. And one of the questions somebody asked at the end during the Q&A was, Are there certifications? Are there trainings? Are there things that I can go through to be board ready? Now, let me paint the picture for you. I think it was two women on the call were in blazers. Their hair is perfect. There is lipstick or lip stain, I don't know. There are earrings. Their backgrounds of their Zoom are not blurred out, but perfect backgrounds. Like Alice Lane type bookshelves with like thoughtfully placed photos and books and plants and like just classy. These women were buttoned up to talk about this topic. And this man is calling in from like a hotel in Turkey, a hotel lobby, from his phone. Like he's holding the phone out here with his AirPods in. And he was in like pajamas, okay? Or like maybe loungewear. It was a set. I don't know, but it was leisurely and it was like a matching set. And the vibe he was putting out, it was, again, a matching set and kind of slouched in this hotel lobby with his phone. So interpret that how you will. But I can't quite figure out if it was like, I don't know, maybe it was a classy matching linen set. I can't recall. But that was the picture, right? It was these two women that were just like the picture perfect, executive women. And then this man that was like probably living a busy life and just, wanted to still participate, but just dialed in when he could. And he responded. He responded to the question. Again, the question was, what certifications do I need to sit on the board? And he responded. And his response was, no man has ever asked that. And my eyes got big and I was like, oh, damn. I thought that was so interesting how, not just for women, but for everybody, we hold ourselves back thinking that we're not ready. We hold ourselves back thinking that there are levels we need to unlock in life before we can take advantage of opportunities, before we can sit on a board, before we can be an executive, before we can be a people manager. Well, what things do I need to read? What things do I need to learn? And then by somehow doing all of that, you'll become, quote, ready. And then you'll unlock all of these opportunities, new jobs, new roles, new projects, new ventures. But you just can't do that until you're, quote, ready. And even the term ready is so vague and undefinable and relative. When I wrote my first press release, I was like, well, I've never done this before, and felt immediate shame, panic, and guilt because somehow I had tricked people into thinking that I could do this. And so now I'm having to do it and people are going to find out that I'm a fraud. But none of us come from the manufacturer. Like none of our default is a skill set of writing press releases. Like none of us are like birthed from the womb with like this innate skill of writing press releases. None of us come with that setting. Every single human that has written a damn press release has written one with it being their first time. It's not like we all went to press writing class and you just missed it. I did what everyone else did. I Googled press release templates. I went to 6 different company websites and copy pasted certain paragraphs and, rewrote them and created my own copy blocks and rewrote it my own words. I copied formats, date formats. I honestly borrowed a lot of copy, repurposed a lot of copy. I used, thesaurus.com. And then it went through a ton of iterations with my team. Lots of people looked at it. Tons of people rewrote it. Tons of people made edits and it was released. And I absolutely, after that, thought, well, now I'm ready to write press releases. But when I think back on it, I did it. So arguably, I was ready then too. Like I was ready to do it because I did it. And just because I have one done doesn't mean I'm more ready to do it again. I just have a little bit more context. I have a little bit more experience and I could maybe do it faster. So we need to redefine ready for ourselves. I have kind of a personal story here. I lost my mom to her second battle with cancer a few years back. And my mom was somebody who never felt ready. She never felt thin enough or good enough. Like one example, I wanted to take her to the Grand America for an event one night. And it's like a nice hotel in Utah, but it's not like so fancy. It's old. It was like built during the Olympics in like 2002. It's old, but like kind of fancy, I guess. Like there's a harpist in the lobby. And she was like, I'm not fancy enough for a place like that. She would constantly put everything in her life out of reach for her. She wasn't good enough for anything, or at least she didn't feel good enough for anything. So she just opted out of everything. Absolutely everything. And she missed out on life. It happened fast, but she didn't do the thing she wanted to do that would have made her life big and full because she never felt ready. And I think about this a lot as I go through life. You do the things even if you don't feel ready. And looking back, I have never felt ready for anything in my life. Really, like I wasn't ready to have a baby. I wasn't ready to start a career. Wasn't ready to speak on stage for the first time. I wasn't ready to interview Abby Wambach in front of hundreds of people. I wasn't ready to run my first webinar. I wasn't ready to buy a house. I wasn't ready to run board meetings. Readiness is not a destination. You are ready right now. You were 4 months ago. You will be 9 years from now. You are ready for whatever life throws at you because it's being thrown at you. So as you go through this exercise, my biggest piece of advice is to say yes, especially if you haven't done it before. You're ready for a million other reasons. Like you have attended great events before, so you know what one should look like, even if you haven't organized an event before. Or you're ready to take on that people manager role because you're doing therapy and self-work and healing, and your inner trauma is being worked on so you can be a deeply human manager, even though you haven't managed people before. You don't learn by learning. You learn by doing. My first job was at a tech company when tech in Utah was still up and coming, so we really didn't have set playbooks for anything. You don't learn to take on big projects by reading about taking on big projects. Like, yes, there are books you can read and, there are frameworks out there, but that doesn't really influence your readiness. It just would influence the way that you do it or how fast you do it. You learn to take on big projects by taking on big projects. You learn how to have hard conversations by having hard conversations. And again, reading and research can all help, so please don't stop doing that. I've read lots of books on people management, on having high stakes conversations, on how to build a business, and those have helped. But none of those have affected my readiness to do those things. So stop waiting for someday. Like really accept and understand that readiness is not a destination. Don't get caught in the someday, because someday will always not be today. The someday destination will never come. And I will tell you, 100% of the things I've done in my life, I hadn't ever done before. Because again, we don't come with this default setting. We don't come with default experience. And they all worked out, like from to varying degrees of success, but they all worked out. Some of the things worked out great. And me feeling ready did not result in the success or failure of that thing. The feeling of readiness or the feeling of not being ready, those didn't affect the outcome at all. It just produced more anxiety and more cortisol in my body, which is just doing no one any favors. Okay, next. What I found so interesting as I looked into this topic was this feeling of unworthiness is in part a managing your perception thing. It's not a you thing, it's a you in the world thing. Like if you're home alone in pajamas eating a cup of noodles on the couch, you don't feel imposter syndrome because you're not in a room of people where you feel trashy compared to them. Like you feel like you lack the accolades to what? Like to your cats, you're alone. So no, imposter feelings don't come up until you're around other people. Other people who could judge you, who are perceiving you and making thoughts and judgments about that. That's what this fear is. It's being judged and found out that you're incompetent or unworthy or you're found wanting by other people. Your perception is such an interesting thing. It's a reflection of you. It's not you. Like how somebody is perceiving me isn't me. So here are a couple things that I have found helpful when it comes to managing my perception. So we talked a little bit about how to like handle that within you and your feelings of readiness and anxiety. But again, there are some tactical things that I've done in my career that have helped me manage my perception, and in so doing, managing my imposter syndrome when I'm around other people. Because I'm often at home in my pajamas eating cup noodles where I don't feel imposter syndrome because no one's home. So number one, you're a beginner. You're beginning. You don't lack experience. You're just a beginner. I listened to a Mel Robbins podcast episode about imposter syndrome. Highly, highly, highly recommend. But this is the one thing I loved. Replace imposter syndrome with, I'm a beginner. And that doesn't come with negative connotations or positive connotations. And it also doesn't come with ego. So let me give you a scenario. You are in a meeting and something is being discussed that you haven't ever done before. Common response number one, you pretend. Your ego takes over. You puff up your chest to make it sound like you've done it before. You say weird things because you're in fear mode. You lose an opportunity to learn because people around you are like, oh, Jen knows this, so I don't need to share or explain. And you end up doing the exact opposite of what you wanted to do, which is to protect your reputation, protect your perception, or whatever. Because people around you may think that you know what's going on, but they also kind of think you're an asshole too. And that took over any thoughts they had about whether you had experience in XYZ area. Like as soon as your ego takes over and you puff out your chest, people switch to like, oh, is Jen kind of an asshole? Like I'm no longer thinking about whether she's done this before, whether she has expertise in financial planning and analysis. I'm only thinking about that she's an asshole. Common response number two, you anticipate others' judgment of you and you beat them to it. You say things like, well, I'm no expert. I've never done this before, so my knowledge is very limited. Well, so-and-so has way more expertise in this area and I'm just here to crack jokes. I'm useless here. Like, haha, I don't know how helpful I'll be because of this and this and this. Like you self-deprecate, you put yourself down before anyone else has the chance to. And you go through these elaborate hoops to ensure your perception is managed. That it would be impossible for someone to find you out because either you're invincible because you know everything, or you're already tearing yourself down so they don't need to. So let's dive into human dynamics a bit here. The quickest way to deflect anyone from finding you out or forming any negative opinion of you isn't positioning like you know everything. Well, this obviously means this. Oh yeah, I've seen this a million times. Oh, of course, this is a common practice that I've done so many times. When you do this, you actually immediately trigger skepticism from your audience and you do the opposite of what you were hoping to do because everyone now thinks you're just an asshole and is like zeroing in on you because you've made yourself a target. There have been so many meetings I've been in that I felt scared or ashamed to admit that I had never discussed these topics before or that I had no experience in that area. And instead of showing up fully in my confidence and in my power of the experience I do have, I tried to do one of those two scenarios. I tried to puff out my chest or I tried to tear myself down rather than being confident in the experience I do have and saying something like, oh, that's new to me. I'd love for you to share more. Think about what that response would trigger in you. If you were in a room and